Welcome to Rock Solid IP, expert strategies for creating real value from your creativity and innovation.
Hello and welcome to Rock Solid IP, expert strategies for creating real value with your creativity and innovation. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist. And of course, I'm here today with attorney Rob Wells from Rock IP Law Firm in Washington, D.C. Today, Rob is going to introduce us to his dynamic Trademark Bootcamp, the ultimate guide to navigating the world of trademarks and securing your brand. In this first series today, we'll be diving deep into the key questions every business owner needs to ask when it comes to protecting their intellectual property, from understanding what a trademark really is to the ins and outs of standard character marks, design marks, and even some of the most unexpected things that can be trademarked. We've got you covered. So let's get into it. Rob, welcome back.
Thanks, Kevin. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk about your Trademark Bootcamp series. So we're diving into the fundamental question. What exactly is a trademark, and why should businesses care about securing one?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so this is going to be a series, right? There's a lot to understand in terms of trademarks, and we're not going to cover all of it in just one episode. So stay tuned and keep coming back. The main question that you're asking is, what is a trademark? A trademark is anything that identifies the source of a product or service. So it can be anything from the name that you provide it to the stylized font that you use, or to a particular logo. You can think all the way back into, maybe even medieval times when there was a blacksmith there and he would make a horseshoe or a sword or whatever, and he'd put his mark, his stamp on it. Complex or as simple as that was, it identified who made it, where it came from. And that's essentially what a trademark exists for, and how it gets used is to protect the public's ability, consumers' ability to recognize the source of a product or service.
And then what are the main types of trademarks available for businesses to protect their brand?
The two main types of trademarks, and there are others, and we'll get into them, but the two main types of trademarks are either a character mark, sometimes we refer to it as a word mark, or a design mark, or maybe a logo. For a character mark, that is just the letters, the numbers, or the words of your mark, without any stylization, without really even paying attention to the spacing around it. We're just looking at the characters of the mark itself. So that is just the name Coca-Cola, not in any, not in their fancy font, not with their specific color, nothing of that nature. And then a design mark is when we're talking about your actual logo, your artistic design that identifies your product. It would be the stamp that the blacksmith might put onto his sword or his horseshoe. And then we can, you can kind of combine those. You can put, if your mark has a particular logo on it, along with the words that identify your company, for example. Sometimes we'll refer to it as a combination mark, but as a trademark attorney, we'll file those as, they'll be a design mark. We're claiming the actual design. So that could be just the words in a stylized format, or it could be other artistic or design components that are there with it.
So how should a business decide to choose one or the other, or when should a business decide to choose one over the other?
The broadest protection that exists there would certainly be for the character mark. When some of my clients come to me and say, look, we don't have a ton of money to throw behind this, what should we go for first? The answer is almost certainly a character mark. A character mark can be used regardless of the style or the color or any other features that might identify your source. So it is certainly the broadest form of protection that you can get in terms of trademarks. And then the design mark is one that we encourage you to use for protecting the stylized look and feel of your logo or your slogan, etc. And within the design mark, you get a choice as to whether to claim color or not claim color. And when you do claim color, the mark has to be in that particular color scheme. So if you, for example, choose, you had Coca-Cola's mark and it's in red, well, now you can't really use it in black. And what happens if you put it on a red background and you couldn't necessarily use it in white? So we frequently suggest not using color unless that color is a specific component of your mark, or obtaining the color portion of that mark a little bit later on, maybe in a subsequent application.
Okay, interesting. So then are there specific requirements a mark must meet to be eligible for registration?
Yeah, there certainly are. So number one, your mark can't be functional. there are going to be, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but certain things, certain components of a mark, not just your appearance, but for example, color or smell or the way that something actually might work. And those things can't be covered under trademark. They need to be used in commerce. So they have to actually be something that you are using or that you intend to use within a relatively short period of time in commerce to sell goods and services. And specifically as to the USPTO and finding a federal registration, it has to be used in interstate commerce, or at least in commerce that's not just within a single state. So that's one requirement. And then the next requirement is the distinctiveness of your mark. It has to be distinctive, and it can't be something that's already in use by another company or something that would confuse consumers or remove language that maybe everybody needs to describe their own products or services in your industry. Those we refer to as kind of generic marks or really descriptive marks.
Does something like using a podcast, for example, can you trademark a podcast before you've actually released any episodes, or do they have to see that you've done it? Because you mentioned that it has to be intended to use for commerce. How would something like that, or like a YouTube channel or something like that, play in?
Yeah. So when we trademark an intended podcast or an intended YouTube channel, you can certainly file those under what's called an ITU, or an intent to use. There are two different kind of avenues that you run down. One is actual use, and then you have to provide the USPTO with what are referred to as specimens of use, kind of photos or screenshots, for example, if it's online, of your actual use of the product, and show that you actually are selling or offering that product or service. By contrast, if it's an intent to use, you're saying, we're not using it yet, but we intend to within a 5-year period of time traditionally. And when you do that, then the USPTO can grant you your trademark rights to register the mark, but it won't actually be registered until you demonstrate that you actually are using it. Once they allow the mark, then you have 6 months to provide evidence of use. And then you can extend that 6-month window in 6-month increments for up to about 5 years.
Okay. So basically it would just be to so that no one would take the name or take the idea or something like that, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. How do you determine if a particular mark, like a name or a symbol, is too generic to be trademarked?
That's a great question. So when you file a trademark, one of the things that you have to declare is what class of goods and services does your mark fall into? There's 42 different classes of goods and services. And within that, once you identify a class, you also provide a description of the types of products or services that you're going to offer under your mark. So what happens is the USPTO, when they're reviewing it, will take a look at your genus or your class of goods and service, and they'll make a determination about whether the words that you're using in your mark are necessary in order for other people kind of providing similar goods and services to describe their goods and services. And if the answer to that is yes, you kind of have to use that term in order to sell that type of a product, then it's too generic and you won't be able to obtain that.
And what are some examples of some of the unusual things that can be trademarked that businesses might not really think of?
So that's a great question. Number one, there's trade dress. Trade dress applies to the overall look and feel of your product. Cars, for example, are great for trade dress. This is the look and feel of, say, a Porsche, and maybe a retro Porsche, one of that distinctive, sleek design.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you would refer to it as the grille on a Jeep. Most people, I think, can identify a Jeep just from seeing the front of the vehicle with the really round headlights and that 8-slotted grille. Those types of things can be used and registered to protect your brand. Another is geographical indicators. So geographical indicators would protect the geographical source or location where a product is sourced from. That typically applies a lot to more, luxury goods. So for example, champagne. Champagne gets used to describe sparkling wine that comes from Champagne, France. Cuban cigars, right? Like obviously those are from Cuba. Another one that another type of thing that you can protect sound marks. So that's, for example, the Netflix sound when you see that big N show up and then you hear that can be protected, or the NBC chimes, that can be protected as well. Scent marks can actually be protected. So scent marks, if you think about, in my opinion, the very best one is, the smell of Play-Doh. Play-Doh it gets used all the time as a descriptor for, what's protectable under a scent mark. I think if you open up a can of Play-Doh and you smell it, that kind of vanilla-ish scent. That as opposed to, and this is where we get into it can't be the trademark can't be functional. So perfumes and fragrances, those typically don't get protected because the purpose of them is exactly that scent and a variety of different scents. So whereas Play-Doh, the scent of the Play-Doh is not typically a functional component.
Yeah, it's not a part of what you use it for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. You can also get color marks. So color marks are, again, where the color is a key component to brand recognition. So think about Tiffany blue for jewelry boxes and packaging, or think about the color red on the bottom of a woman's Louboutin shoe. That can also be protected. Or think about brown for UPS's delivery services. That can be protected as well. You can also get marks for certification marks. So for example, I think we're all pretty familiar with, the Intel Inside or the indications that your product is organic, or that it has certain, safety standards or things like that. Or you can also get collective marks to identify, a union, for example, or a group or association. Those are all different types of things that can all be protected with trademarks.
So in that sense, then, if you talk about the Play-Doh smell, which is so distinctive, and having a 4-year-old, it was like the first time we broke out Play-Doh, I was like, wow, that takes me back. That is just instant nostalgia, But as far as that, like, what does that protect? Does it protect other people from creating something that smells the same?
Not just anything that smells the same, but certainly any competing good or service. Remember that
Okay.
I talked to you about how when you file your mark, you're going to get it, you'll have to declare certain classes of goods and services. And so if somebody else made, essentially what we're going to call Play-Doh, but that putty type of stuff for children, and they made it smell like Play-Doh, that would be a trademark infringement.
Okay. And in your color example, the Louis Vuitton shoe is just, if another shoe company tried to use that exact same color, that wouldn't work. But obviously you can't commandeer that color for the entire world just by trademarking it.
Right. And it's Louboutin. So you can't just use a color red, but I can't use that color red on the bottom of a woman's high-heeled shoe.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Are there any particular trademark marks that are easier to secure than others?
There certainly are. The more distinctive your mark is, the easier it is to protect. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but if you can come up with a made-up word that doesn't exist anywhere else, that is the easiest to get registered. And then when you take a look at at trademarks, character marks and design marks, those are certainly easier to protect than some of these other marks that we've talked about, color marks and sound marks and even scent marks. Those typically require evidence that they have acquired secondary meaning. So when we file those types of applications, we need to demonstrate to the USPTO that in the minds of the public, it has acquired secondary meaning, that consumers associate, for example, the smell of Play-Doh with a particular product, and that scent is not generic, that it's specific to our brand. That can be somewhat challenging and frankly a bit more expensive. So it's not necessarily as easy to protect as just a standard character mark or a design mark.
What would be the advantage to protecting a smell like that versus just the chemical, just what it's made of, the Play-Doh itself? Can you, because I was thinking about when you said about perfume, I mean, I imagine they can probably like trademark the recipe, right?
Well, the recipe doesn't get trademarked. It would get potentially copyrighted, but if we're talking about Play-Doh itself, the scent that comes with Play-Doh is due not to the chemical composition of Play-Doh itself, but is due to actual scents that are put into the Play-Doh to make it smell that way, to give it that pleasant aroma. You may have had experience with a 4-year-old of buying Play-Doh that came from that's not name brand Play-Doh, and that would be it doesn't smell the same. The benefit to claiming something like color or a scent or anything else like that is kind of exactly what you already alluded to. It took you back. And when we take those types of additional factors, the actual appearance, the sleekness of a Porsche, or when we talk about colors, the brown for UPS, or that blue for Tiffany's and jewelry. We're adding additional indicators that really solidify in the minds of consumers and make you more memorable, make your mark something that evokes emotion, additional emotion that goes along with, your character mark or your design mark.
Okay, that makes sense. And then how do you decide whether a specific element such as a color or a slogan is even eligible for trademark protection?
So there, number one, it can't be the same thing that exists, with a whole bunch of other marks. If the scent or the color is already present and prevalent in your industry, for example, it'll be hard to protect. Then you need to demonstrate that it actually has acquired secondary meaning. So that typically comes down to getting legal experts to opine on it and maybe write opinions, and usually to customer surveys that demonstrate that, hey, 90% of consumers recognize the smell of Play-Doh and can identify it that way. Or the shape of a Coca-Cola bottle packaging, for example, is distinctive. If you showed people the outline of a Coca-Cola bottle, do they actually recognize it or not? Would they say that's Coke, or would they say that might be root beer? Usually they'll say it's Coke, which is why it's a protected mark.
No, that makes sense. All right. Well, interesting stuff. Thanks for tuning in to Rock Solid IP, expert strategies for creating real value from creativity and innovation with Rob Wells. This was part one of our 4-part series of our Trademark Bootcamp. So look for episode 2 to come out soon. To connect with Rob, you can visit rock-ip.com. And please like and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review. We'd appreciate it. Rob, always good to see you. Looking forward to episode 2 of this.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.